Andy Garcia's role in Landman going into Season 3 has become one of the most talked-about mysteries among fans, not because his presence is guaranteed, but because his character's influence still looms large even when he's off-screen. In Seasons 1 and 2, Garcia's character, Galino, didn't dominate every episode, but he acted like a gravitational force, shaping outcomes, manipulating alliances, and quietly steering major power plays at MTEX. Season 3's status for him isn't just about whether he shows up more. It's about what his absence or presence means for the show's central themes of power, trust, and consequence. Throughout Landman's early seasons, Galino has been introduced as a kind of kingmaker, the older, experienced insider with access to resources and connections that make other characters look small by comparison. You could see right away that he wasn't a typical antagonist or a one-dimensional villain. He's charismatic, calm, and intelligent, and he doesn't need to raise his voice to get what he wants. But beneath that composure is someone who knows exactly how to position himself so that the chaos around him works in his favor. That's why discussions about his status in Season 3 aren't just about screen time. They're about whether the show intends to keep building its central conflicts around his influence or push the story in a new direction without him at the center. By the end of Season 2, the narrative clearly shifted away from old power structures towards something more self-driven for Tommy Norris and the rest of the cast. Tommy's decision to launch his own oil company wasn't just a personal turning point. It was a signal that Landman was ready to move beyond the walls of MTEX and, by extension, beyond Galino's direct control. Since Galino was deeply tied to MTEX's internal ecosystem, quietly maneuvering from the shadows, placing bets on people, shaping deals without overtly taking credit, his role naturally becomes less central when that ecosystem fractures. So, one key part of understanding Garcia's Season 3 status is recognizing that the story itself has outgrown the original power dynamic that made his character so compelling. That said, Landman has never treated Galino as someone you stop worrying about just because he isn't on screen. His influence was woven into the fabric of MTEX's structure and its leadership culture, and that legacy doesn't disappear just because other characters are trying to break free. In many ways, Season 3 is poised to explore the consequences of a world where Galino's methods have already shaped events, even if he isn't personally present. When you build a company culture around secrecy, manipulation, and strategic advantage, the effects have a long tail. Tommy's company is born out of that culture because he knows exactly how damaging it can be. So, Galino's impact remains relevant whether he appears physically or not. There's also the matter of how other characters perceive him. In Landman, power isn't just about what someone does. It's about what people think they can do. Characters like Cammy and even some of Galino's rivals often talk about him as though he's the benchmark for what success and strategic mastery look like in this world. Even if he doesn't show up in many scenes in Season 3, that perception gives his character a kind of ghostly presence. A lot of the tension in the oil world of the show comes from people trying to live up to, react against, or outmaneuver the legacy figures from Seasons 1 and 2, and Galino was the biggest one of all. Some fans wondered whether Landman Season 3 might introduce new rivals who carry similar weight, effectively allowing the story to evolve without Galino being central on screen. That's a plausible direction. Once a universe is built with a certain level of political and corporate intensity, the writers don't have to rely on the same set of personalities to sustain it. Themes like betrayal, takeover battles, territorial pressure, and leadership collapse can be driven by the next wave of characters, whether they're old allies, new competitors, or disillusioned insiders. If Season 3 does take that route, it would show that Galino's era was important but finite, almost like the professor whose lessons shape the next generation even after he's retired. There's also the question of narrative necessity. Landman is shifting focus toward Tommy's agency, his company's legitimacy, and the internal fractures that emerged as a result of institutional failures at MTEX. If Galino were to reappear prominently, it would need to serve a very specific purpose, either as a direct confrontation with Tommy's newfound independence, a thematic reminder that old power never completely dies, or as a catalyst for new conflict that Tommy's company isn't prepared to handle. If the writers bring him back in Season 3, It would likely be in a role that challenges Tommy in ways no one else can, not just strategically, but psychologically. On the other hand, keeping Galino more peripheral could also be a smart choice for the story. His name carries weight, and his off-screen influence can be referenced to heighten tension without overshadowing the characters whose arcs the show now wants to deepen. Characters like Tommy, Cammy, Angela, and even new arrivals all have plenty of unresolved conflict with each other. Adding Galino directly into that mix runs the risk of reverting back to the old power dynamics the show seems eager to move past. In other words, Galino's absence or limited presence in Season 3 could be just as meaningful as his appearances, signaling that the era of puppet masters pulling strings from behind the scenes is ending. What's clear from the way Landman has structured the transition into Season 3 is that the show isn't done with Galino's presence, it's just redefining it. Characters may invoke his name, recall his strategies, or react to consequences tied to his past decisions. But the story is no longer about Galino's rise or his manipulation of MTechs. It's about what happens when someone like Tommy finally starts something of his own, and how the ghost of a figure like Galino both haunts and informs that effort. So, if you're wondering whether Andy Garcia's character will physically appear more often in Landman Season 3, the answer isn't a simple yes or no. His narrative influence remains central even if his face isn't on screen. Whether or not he has dramatic scenes, Galino's strategies, legacy, and the systemic environment he helped shape continue to affect every decision Tommy's new company makes, every rival who eyes the rising threat, and every boardroom conversation where trust is questioned. That layered presence, the idea that power persists even when its holder steps back, is the real status of Galino in Season 3. He isn't gone. He's a shadow figure everyone still has to reckon with, and Landman is smarter for keeping that tension alive even as the real story finally begins.